Hello everyone, thanks for coming here at the International Festival of Journalism in Perugia. And thanks for coming to this panel, Yemen from the Forgotten to the Untold War. I'm Laura Silvia Battaglia, al-Jalal, member of Frontline Friends Register and journalist in conflict zone and in Yemen as well. And it's a great pleasure for me here really to have with me Afrah Nasser, which is really one of the most prominent journalists in all Middle East. And yeah, she's Yemeni, of course, but she's totally expert in the area and everything regarding the area. And Afra actually is a fellow of the Arab Center. And we will try to go straight to the point because we have only 30 minutes. So we encourage you, if you want to make questions, the last 5 minutes, you can raise your hand, so we'll pass you microphones, or if you prefer, you can send your questions via private message on my Twitter, badgirl74. I will try to pick all questions as much as we can. Afra, my first question for you. In these days when Yemen again became one of the headlines, the breaking news because of the peace talks, but in general Yemen is something and is a country not so much told. Usually it's a cliche, but not too much a cliche, but we used to say that Yemen is the forgotten war. I personally believe that it's more an untold war. And I would like to ask you why and where Yemeni journalists are in all of this. We saw some of them that were released in these days during the exchange of prisoners starting with the peace talks. Yeah, where are Yemeni journalists and why Yemen is a country untold?
Thank you so much for having me to begin with, and thank you for the audience that is here. I want first to say that I really appreciate that the festival is having a session about Yemen. When I tweeted that I will be in the festival, I got so many letters and so many messages from friends and people in Yemen, really happy that Yemen is getting a place or a space in such an international platform. And this tells you how we Yemenis also perceive, how we feel our space in the international platforms in general. It's really difficult to get the attention that Yemen deserves. It's really difficult to get the media coverage that Yemen deserves. And the question that you asked, why Yemen is untold, it's really a big question. And I think we can start locally. Just recently, there was a huge, or one of the most significant prisoner swap between the two sides in the conflict in Yemen, the Houthi armed group and Saudi Arabia. And in this prisoner swap, there were 4 journalists that were finally released after being imprisoned for many, many years, like more than 6 years now. And that reflects the status, the situation for journalists inside the country. Most of the journalists are targeted, imprisoned, harassed. Many of them were killed. Many of them have dropped and left this career by itself and went to other careers or jobs because how deadly and difficult this profession has become. And that reflects in the how limited that source of information that could come out of the country. And for many years, Yemen was also like under blockade, where international journalists found it extremely difficult to go to the country. You don't very often see, major media, mainstream outlets having correspondence inside the country. So the situation for journalism inside the country has been extremely bleak and disastrous, which reflected and how limited the stories that come out of Yemen. But I think at the same time, this should have been a great reason for journalists to focus on Yemen when this place is ravaged by conflict, and yet we find little stories and little reports coming out of that. That should be very, very attractive for any journalist to cover. But at the same time, it's been a shame, I would say, that Yemen is only covered when there is an external factor comes into the picture. So only if there is Saudi Arabia or Iran is involved, Yemen becomes in the headlines. But covering Yemen as it is for what it is, that is, rare to see.
Thank you, Afra. Do you think there is following up this answer, a specific reason? Of course, there was a blockade, it was very difficult to gain the access, but also authorities were not so keen to give visas to journalists. Sometimes I thought after what happened in Syria, that so many journalists were witnessing murders and war crimes, maybe less presence of journalists, of foreign journalists in a country in war could be better for all the actors inside. Would you think it could be a possible reason among all the others?
Reasons of what?
Of the fact that journalists can't have access to Yemen.
The international aspect of the conflict in Yemen has played a major role in journalists not being able to get into Yemen. So for, let's say, regular Italian journalist that wants to go to Yemen, you have to, like, he or she has to ask for permission and deal with all the logistics through so many authorities in the country. The war has fragmented the centralized authority in the country, where today you have so many Yemens within the one Yemen. So you have Yemen in the north, controlled by the Houthi armed group. You have Yemen in the south, controlled between the Yemeni government and the Southern Transitional Council. And at the same time, to get a permission, you have to get that from the Saudi-led coalition. So it's a really complicated and long process to get to finally have the papers and go. But I can say, despite all these obstacles, social media platforms have been a major source for getting information by citizen journalists inside the country. And with all modesty, this is what I've been able to do without really having that constant communication with my sources on the ground, whether from citizen journalists or people working in human rights groups. I wasn't going to be able to get that information. But I'm very happy to say that after 11 years of living in exile, finally I managed to go to Yemen last year and went to the Yemen in the south and Yemen in the north. And that was extremely important for the work that I do. Just seeing things on my own eyes was extremely important and at the same time enriched my understanding of the situation in a way that I was able to produce better quality work.
Can I ask your feelings once you get into Yemen after all these years? Which Yemen did you found? I mean,
I sigh because the conflict has devastated Yemen in an unbelievable way. But at the same time, like the resilience of people emerged under the rubbles. I saw to my first impression, I saw a really bleak situation of African migrants in the high roads, going in under the sun for many hours with no specific destination other than just to cross Yemen to go to Saudi Arabia. So we have a huge migration crisis in Yemen with no policy whatsoever from the different warring parties how to deal with them. And many of the migrants are subjected to the most horrific human rights abuses, from rape, physical attacks, detention, and some of them are killed. So those are like the most vulnerable groups that I should mention in the beginning. Then, of course, the situation for children has been really devastating under the conflict. You have so many schools that were bombed. Many children, like we're talking about millions, like maybe 2 million, and even those numbers and statistics don't really reflect the scale of the problem on the ground. So child soldiers in Yemen is a major, major issue that I think it will be an important factor if we will have lasting peace or not. All the warring parties have recruited children. We're talking about 10 years old and 11, 12 years old children carrying guns and standing at checkpoints. This is what I was able just to see in my bare eyes while crossing. There's so many checkpoints, which to me was just going like a thriller and scary movie. That's how it felt to be on the ground. The level of danger or the level of fear that you experience in those checkpoints really torn your mind apart, I would say, because while you think that you are in one country, but you are also like in two countries or three, where you don't know, you don't even know like if you need to ask for a visa to be in this part of the country or that part. And the rules are extremely vague. And as a woman, it was double, the suffering was double because today in the Houthi-controlled areas, there is requirement for women to have mahram, the guardian. So that was, like my heart was all, like I was terrified, all those checkpoints. And my crime was just that I was a woman. Of course, I managed through having a fake mahram, which was my cousin. So we pretended that I was his wife, and he's like my brother, you know, and he's already married, but I had his wife's passport. So we were acting in this thriller and scary movie just to get to my home in Yemen. And I think it's also telling that I didn't tell my family that I was going to visit them because they were going to be terrified about me being in these checkpoints. So I'm telling you about my experience as Yemeni. So imagine if you're a foreigner trying to go around the country and cover stories. It's a tiring, exhausting, heart-wrenching, demoralizing experience. I'm really out of words just to describe that kind of experience. I was very lucky that I managed to get through all those checkpoints and leave the country also. If you ask me if I would do it again, I would do it. Of course, I would do it again. With the news coming today about, you know, some of the peace talks in Sana'a, one has to be, you know, hopeful. But without ending the mahram rule for women, it's really difficult to imagine living in Yemen as a woman.
Sure. This last year was extremely challenging for women from Yemen, and I share same feelings. My last time in August was total hell, I just want to say. But now there are peace talks, and Yemen is again the headline. We saw these pictures, images of prisoners hugging their mothers, kissing their wives, which is something the Yemeni culture rarely happens in public. It was really emotional. But the question now is, really Yemen can get into peace? And if yes, which kind of peace? Among whom? Because things are not so clear. We saw Saudi ambassador coming to Yemen with something unbelievable that he arrived in Sana'a. We couldn't believe that. And the Houthis were the enemies of Saudis, now are making deals. But what about the rest of the country? For whom this peace will be a good thing?
So a lot of people confuse that the only warring parties in Yemen is the Houthi armed group and the Saudis, or the Saudi-led coalition. But that's not true. It's more than that and more complicated than that. We have so many warring parties. So just because we're seeing the Houthis are talking with the Saudis doesn't mean that the others are also in peace talks. So without having all those warring parties have some sort of understanding, some sort of agreement, some sort of talks, I think we will just have 1% of this peace, which is absolutely not going to be a lasting peace. So all the warring parties on the domestic level, the regional level, the international level, all have to come and negotiate and hold peace talks. Without that, I think, unfortunately, we will see the resumption of the violence and conflict soon.
Also because in the south there are also troops loyal to Emirates, and the central government has a lot of problems inside. So it's really complex to understand different layers in which Yemen is made. And I have a last question for you, Afra, and then we will open to everyone who's here wants to ask something. Europeans, I can talk about Europe, of course. In general, I mean, the general public doesn't know wars until refugees knock at the door of Europe. And Italy is one of the places where people knock at doors. But sometimes one of the questions that pops up often is, where are Yemeni refugees? Yemeni refugees maybe don't need to come. They don't need to leave the country. Maybe this war is not so terrible if they don't leave. So can we try to answer to this question?
I don't think a country will pay attention to a conflict only once refugees knock on their door. And Ukraine is a great example. I think if there is a political will from a government, there will automatically and immediately be an interest and attention to that conflict. So while I pray for people in Ukraine and think that they should absolutely live in peace and dignity, but sometimes I wish if we just had 1% of that coverage, media coverage, going to Ukraine, if it can go to Yemen. So it's not really about the refugees. The crisis is in the political will. Like there is a political crisis in the leadership in the Western countries, not paying attention to Yemen or other crises. So it's a matter of political will.
It's a matter of political will, and now, of course, we will see what will happen after these peace talks will finish, or what will come out from this peace talks. And if everyone wants to ask questions, we have 5 minutes, so we will be able to pick questions from the audience. So raise your hand, please, if you have questions. Yeah, there is a question here. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Carlotta. I'm a journalism student from Antwerp in Belgium. And I actually have a question for Laura, if it's possible. You are a teacher. My teacher Nadia told me. How do you bring over your knowledge and your experience to your students?
Thank you for the question. I will pick another one also. So if a question for Afra, and then I will follow. Let's see. Raise your hands. There is one there. Yeah, we can pick all, and then we will answer. Thank you.
Hi. Okay. I want to ask you a question to both of you. When last year the Ukrainian conflict started, what did you feel when the European newspapers started to talk about it like a lot, as you are from a country where like a conflict is ongoing, but nobody talks about it?
Yeah, just as I mentioned, not only just not to make it specific about Ukraine, but you remember Meghan and Harry Netflix thing? When the media coverage went to that, I was baffled. I was like, can we get 1% of that coverage to Yemen, to Sudan, to Syria, and even to Ukraine? Just to reflect on your question, I think there is a problem with editors wanting to please the audience and what is trending. And I think they have the power, editors have the power to set the trend. So for journalists, students here, like the nice lady here, this is really about like understanding how you manufacture what Noam Chomsky once said, manufacture consent. How do you set trends? So I absolutely think that Ukraine should be covered. And I absolutely think that all crises should be covered. But that disproportionality and unequal media coverage, it reflects the biases and the unobjectivity sometimes of people in the editorial room. I'm not going to mention which media outlet in specific, but this is really telling about what editors want, how they want to please the audience. Do they want to have more clicks? Are we going to cover Kim Kardashian more than Yemen? You see? So, and I think this is what young journalists should pay attention to. Try to have your niche, like whatever you think is uncovered enough, go for it. That's your job, I think, as a journalist. Your role is to put spotlight where it's dark. Thank you.
Right, and also starting to fight double standards. I think we have time, even though maybe the online broadcasting will stop, but we have, I think, other 5 minutes. So please, ask your questions to Afra. We can hear you.
You were saying? So you were saying on how editors can shape the news, basically, but as journalists, how do you do, because you need to have your news accepted by the editors, so like even if you think that this must be covered, you still have to get your article accepted, so how can you do that as a journalist?
Yeah.
Okay, we can pick also the second one.
Thank you so much. Oh, sorry. A question that's, I think, somewhat related, which is that I think there's a breakdown often between the consumers of these news stories and any understanding of how to actually participate or play a role in helping with the crisis that is being talked about. And so is there a way to bring more, I'm not a journalist, so I'm not sure if like solutions journalism as a concept works here or not, but like, is there a way to bring an audience closer so that even if you are able to get a story through the editorial boards to people's, eyes, that they can feel like they can play a role in actually doing something about it, as opposed to interacting with it in a sort of very removed and potentially instigating just more fatigue around the topic? Yes. Thanks.
Wow. That's deep. So regarding the how do you convince your editor? I started as a full-time reporter in Sana'a, in Yemen Observer, but when my editor refused or was reluctant to my coverage of the protest during Yemen's uprising, I turned to my blog and I started blogging. So I'm just trying to answer from my own experience. Me having a strong belief in the importance and the significance of what I was going to say really made it it got the attention. Maybe I have here Diana Mallid from Daraj. She was speaking in the previous panel before that. I remember she said it really beautifully. She said, "Content is the king." So as long as you have that content that is very timely, very important, you will manage. You might have to push a lot and fight, but you will manage. And I think such festivals are very important to network with the right people and the right editors, the right teams, maybe create the next big thing. We have today TikTok, I don't know, GBT. So create the next thing. Think about what is the next big thing. And I'm really, I cannot stress enough, people in Europe, you have all this freedom of expression. You have all these resources. What are you waiting for? So regarding your question, I didn't fully understood. It was really difficult for me, but I think getting people's attention is so easy as long as there is human story to it. There is, truthfulness. I remember once writing a feature about Yemeni coffee farmer who was a refugee in the US and was working as Uber taxi driver. And then in the middle of the conflict, he left all of that and went back to Yemen. And now he's selling some of the top and most expensive coffee to the US from Yemen. And I wrote a feature about that, and eventually it got translated into Arabic and even Italian, and it was published in an Italian magazine, even though I wrote it for a Middle East eye. So this is just to tell you, as long as there is human story to, leave all the international politics and how complicated it is, but one human story could touch millions of people's hearts. Yeah.
Sure, and if I may add something, I'm extremely tired of seeing only children starving to death. Of course they are, but it's not possible, in my opinion, to raise the attention of Western audience only based on picturing Yemenis as people who don't have any capacity of reacting. Yemen is fully plenty of great people who are doing in their daily life are struggling, and they're doing incredible, amazing things. And I think, as you mentioned before, the story of the coffee makers, this is the key. So, and I think we have to stop here, unfortunately. So Thank you for coming.
Thank
you,
you.
Afrah
Thank you for
Nasser,
coming.
for coming here. And please care about Yemen. Thank you.